Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily, featuring a conversation with composer Peter Chapman about his music for a Netflix comedy called Workin' Moms. The 7th and final season just aired in April 2023 of Workin' Moms, and it's a comedy about a group of moms who are friends and their challenges as working mothers. The music features heavily another artist named Maylee Todd, and so it was just really fun to talk with Peter about how he created the sound for this really funny show on Netflix. But Peter's also done a bunch of games, so we talk about his music in games too, like Guacamelee 1 and 2. He also did music for Little Big Planet Karting. He did a game called Russian Subway Dogs, and the soundtrack for that is phenomenal. So we talk about some of those projects. He wrote the music for Winona Earp, if you watched that TV show. And we also talk about a project he did out of sheer boredom called Daft Science, which is Beastie Boy remixes using only Daft Punk samples. It's amazing. It's so good. You can find it on Bandcamp. Join us on Discord. That link is down in the show notes. Find us here on YouTube. There's tons of stuff up here. Subscribe to our channel. That'd be amazing. And if you can support us on Patreon, that'd be wonderful as well. Patreon.com/level. All right. Here is Peter Chapman talking about his music for Workin' Moms.
Yeah, so Workin' Moms, it was a production that ran for 7 seasons, detailing the precarious balance that mothers tend to feel when raising children, sort of balancing between their personal lives, their work lives, and their family lives. But it's done with a very comedic twist, so it's not It's not a straightforward drama. It's very funny. And I would actually, one of the things I loved about this show is I found every season that went on, it just got weirder and weirder and funnier. And the writers just started, like, season 1 felt like it had a little bit more of a, like a little bit more of a sincere message. And I mean, that message was there throughout the whole series, but by season 7, it was just chaos. It was hilarious and insane and weird and just got so bizarre. I think at that point it's just the writers trying to entertain themselves. But yeah, that's the gist of it. And I scored it alongside Maylee Todd, who is actually an old friend of mine. We were neighbors and friends, and I think we may have played in some bands together at some point. And when this project came up, it just seemed like a really good fit to work together.
Yeah, because the music is, first of all, especially in the earlier seasons, which is where I was able to focus most of my attention. So please let me know how the music evolves over the seasons. But in
Absolutely.
Those earlier seasons, it's a lot of snippets with just super high energy and a lot of like hand percussion, or maybe not hand percussion, but just a simple texture, right? And then Maylee with cool voice stuff. So talk to me about coming up with that concept and how you got there.
So it was interesting. Season 1 of Workin' Moms, I think no one has ever gone on record as saying this, but my general understanding was that when that show was in production, the original idea was not to have a composer. They were going to license music exclusively. And I believe that, that is a very expensive way to score a television show, especially if you want to, some A-list needle drops. And so, they dug a lot into the indie rock stuff, but I was brought on kind of Maylee and I were brought on kind of as like a contingency plan to sort of fill in the spots where they didn't necessarily want to put in a needle drop. But as the seasons went on, like season 1, episode 1, I had like maybe 2 cues. Like it wasn't like a big, or like maybe 5, like very few. By the end of season 7, I was clocking like 25 cues, 30 cues an episode. So as the series went on, Maylee and I started doing a lot more of the heavy lifting, which allowed them to spend their money on some like pretty awesome bangers. They licensed like Wu-Tang Clan and the Doobie Brothers. Like they went hard on that end, which was really great. And it was also awesome because it allowed Maylee and I to really develop a sound of the show. which, you know, if you go to season 1, you hear it a little bit,
right?
And then you hear a lot more of it in season 2, then more, like a lot more in season 3, and then by season 4, we're like fully just like going hard on the show. So the way the sound of the show came about, we really struggled for. I remember there was about a month where we were just like writing demos, and Catherine Reitman and her partner Phil, they both have great taste in music and very deep taste in music. They were throwing some really cool, you know, indie rock deep cuts at us of, you know, to demonstrate different elements of music that they liked and what they wanted. But there were a couple of tracks that really like captured the essence of what they wanted. There was a Tune Yards track, and there was a track by, I think it was Charlie XX, I think. And it encapsulated this really, there was like a cappella elements in the Tune Yard track, and there was this real aggressive sort of punk rock cheerleader vocal treatment in the Charlie XX track. And I think the two of those became kind of a real stepping stone for the sound of the show. So what we started doing is we created a really a lot of like found percussion. So there's very, very seldom do you ever hear like a kick drum and a snare drum. Like that kind of stuff doesn't happen much in the show. It's a lot of you know, hand claps, banging on things, pieces of wood being smacked together, lots of weird percussion. Like if you looked at my template, there's almost nothing normal in there, and it's all sort of weird custom stuff that I built.
Oh, cool.
And then we mixed that with Maylee Todd's vocals. And so in season 1, she would come over. This is when she lived really close. She would come over a couple times a week, and she would add these elements to the cues. But then what we ended up doing is creating this huge library of like Maylee Todd. I had like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of samples of her just yelling stuff and shouting things and singing things and all these just sort of train of thought vocal lines that she would come up with. And then some of them were on my hard drive, but most of them were actually mapped to my keyboard, so I could just sit there and play her vocals.
Yep.
And we would chop them all up and stuff. So the general kind of approach was this high energy punk rock vocal, but then treated in a very kind of hip hop way with found sound percussion that was also written and very based in kind of hip hop, which is what I kind of grew up producing. So it was a very natural thing for me to do. But then it was funny because then there were these other cues that were very soulful and garage rock, kind of bluesy garage rock style cues with her singing on them. And then there were also a lot of more very like earnest sentimental cues, which would be acoustic guitar, ukulele, like vibraphone, and her vocals on top of that. So there were sort of like 3 styles of cue if you watch the show. And then as the seasons went on, I spent a lot of time listening to a lot of pop music that was coming out, and I was kind of nicking little ideas. Like I'd listen to something and be like, oh, that's a cool bass sound, I want to incorporate that into the score. Because there was a point where I remember we'd been working on the show for a while, and I was like, you know, a lot of our influences that we're referencing are like 5-6 years old. You know, like I don't want this show to sound like it's a 5 or 6 year old show. I want every season to sound contemporary. So I was constantly listening to a lot of modern pop and kind of stealing little things, being like, oh, that's a cool little thing, that's a neat rhythmic idea, that's a cool vocal concept, you know, and stuff like that.
I did listen to an interview that you did, I think it was just a year or two ago, but that's beside the point. The point that I want to make is that one of the things you talk about in there is how when you like worked at a keyboard store, or maybe your dad ran some kind of thing like that, and the old guys would come in and play Van Halen on the keyboards and how you didn't want to sound old. So, and I loved that because I spent time working in a music store too, and everybody comes in and plays Stairway. I mean, this was so many decades ago now, but I know that vibe of, and you can almost see it when they walk in the door, who's going to sit down and do it. And so I wonder if, that plays into your desire to keep things contemporary too, if that's like a piece of that drives you to be listening to modern music all the time.
Absolutely. I think that created an awareness that can happen. It created awareness that if you're not careful, and I know this about myself, I'm 42. It does take a little bit of effort for me to, reach out into new music land because, if it was up to me, I would just listen to Beck and the Beastie Boys all the time, and I'd be happy for the rest of my life. But I constantly want to hear what new artists are doing. Mm-hmm. So I mean, honestly, Spotify has been incredible for that. But also, Spotify has made it like musical trends come and go in a month now. Like it's just like wham, and then it's over, and then wham, and then it's over. Where it used to be, you'd get a good 5 years out of something, and now it's just like by the time you've heard it, it's I have nieces that I'm always bugging. I'm like, what are you listening to? Can I see your playlists? What do you got on there? Like I'm constantly trying to I used to do it to my wife's little cousins who were quite a bit younger, but now they're even kind of too old for me to bug for new influences.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's so fascinating. But to circle back to Workin' Moms, that's a really wise move to keep the show fresh, to have your finger on that pulse.
There is as a composer, there is like a fear of, you don't want to become the old uncool guy. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to be that guy. And that's, I've seen that happen to a few people, but I also think that happens because you get set in your ways and you're not willing to evolve and listen to music and figure out new approaches. So, that's one of the reasons I also love constantly working on stuff is because you can it forces you to go out and check out new scores. Like even, when we were working on Winona Earp, I would go running every morning and listen to a new film score every day. Some of them old, some of them new, a lot of contemporary stuff because that was a very contemporary score. And again, similar, like I'd be constantly nicking little ideas like, oh, that's a neat thing they did. I want to do that. That's a cool idea. I want to figure out my version of that, So I'm very much like, music and ideas out. Like I like to keep that cycle fresh.
Sure. And you've done, and we'll come back to Workin' Moms too, because I have more questions about it, but
absolutely.
You've done so many different things too. You've done a lot of ad work, you've done obviously film, obviously TV, obviously games, and probably more things I'm not aware of. So, I guess I'd just love to kind of explore that place for you and what you like about doing a little bit of everything, because it sounds like you do, like you don't want to just be TV or just, one thing. So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
I think it's there are a few different things there. One, I love music. I love it. There's nothing in the world that gets me more excited than music and exploring music. And, even to the point that I really enjoy challenging myself to learn to love styles of music that I hate. Like like new genres will come out and I'll be like, oh, that sounds so dumb. But I'll be like, all right, I gotta figure this out. And I'll, listen to it exclusively for like 2 weeks just to kind of figure it out and be like, all right, I get this. I'm into this, I listened to a 13-hour long playlist with my wife of, I think it was like 90s rave music on a road trip once, partially just because I knew she enjoyed it, but partially I was like, there's probably something here, 13 hours of that'll rot your brain. But But I don't know, and I think keeping it. I love the. I love constantly. It keeps it fresh, like doing different styles, learning different styles of music. It's constantly. It keeps my job fun and interesting, and that was what my experience when I first started. I was doing commercials, and 1 week I would have to, write a reggae track, and the next week I'd have to write a salsa track, and the next week I'd have to write some like Nickelback rock track. And that was something like I loved, because you had to just throw away your inhibitions or how you felt about a genre of music, figure out what makes it great, and then try to capture that and write a track, and essentially in a way like fool everybody into thinking you're an expert at this.
Right.
Which I've done numerous times throughout my career. I've gotten gigs that I don't think I had any business landing, and then had to just like fake my way through it and be like, oh yeah, I got this. And then, go through it. So I think I love the pressure of learning something new, and then being able to apply that to different things you're working on, like the stuff I've learned writing like electronic music, I would apply to orchestral scoring, and vice versa. There's a lot of cross-pollinating that you can do with different genres and different styles. So, and the other thing, I mean, the honest truth is, in Canada, while we do have a really exciting post scene here with TV and film, and the video game world is getting really exciting, you do have to be flexible. You can't just do video games. If I just did video games, I would not be able to pay my rent. You have to be able to pivot and work on different projects. And, if a movie comes along, you have to be able to handle a movie. If a TV show comes along, you have to be able to handle it. Like, I don't know anyone that's just like, I'm only doing this, and that, and that's my gig in Canada, at least, just because they're just, it's not, it's not like Los Angeles, where there's just, films being made every second of every minute,
Right. Right. Where are you in Canada? Are you in Toronto as well?
Yeah.
Okay. That's one of the fun things about Workin' Moms, is getting to see the city a little bit, I love that, because I've never been. I've always wanted to go. I have friends. Who doesn't know someone who lives in Toronto? It's like, I would love to visit, but it's fun to kind of get to visit through the show,
Yeah, and they did a really great job of repping it well. You know what I mean? And I love, I love that they didn't pretend it was New York or whatever. Like, they were in Toronto, and they went to local businesses. They used the local business names. You would see it on the signs. So, there was a time I remember I was out with my wife having dinner, and then I stopped and I looked around. I'm like, wait a minute, this is Flock. This is from season 1, episode 4 or whatever. They all sat around and had dinner here, and I'm looking around going, oh geez, that's why it looks familiar.
Yeah.
And then I love when you see like your old neighborhood or your friend's neighborhood, or like parks that they go to. So that I really loved.
Yeah. Being such a prolific composer from a pretty young age, really, what made you decide to stay in Canada? I always ask this question, because I love it when people set down, like, I'm in Minneapolis. I have no intent. I love Minneapolis. I want to stay there. So what makes you stay in Toronto rather than, deciding, hey, I need to move to LA or whatever?
Oh, that is a spicy question. No, you know what? So, I mean, I moved to Toronto when I was 19 years old to go to art college, actually. And
from Halifax?
From Halifax, correct.
Okay,
yeah. Which is funny, because there is an art college in Halifax, but I just really wanted to get out of Halifax.
Yeah. No, that's important.
I love Halifax, but I deeply love Halifax, but when you're 19, you gotta spread your wings.
Yes.
So I moved here, and it was a really hard slog. It was hard to meet people and hard to make friends. The first 5 years here were really difficult, but then I got a job working at Paul's Boutique, which is this really awesome guitar store in a really cool part of town, and that was like suddenly I now knew every single musician in every single band in Toronto. And
Nice.
that was awesome. And then I made all these friends, and then I developed a bit of a life here. Now, in 2017, like Los Angeles was never really on our radar until 2017. My wife and I went there for a little stint. We went there for like 4 days. And we loved it. We came back. We're like, we got to go back. That was incredible. That was like the craziest 4 days of our life. Yeah. So we got married that summer and then went on sort of a honeymoon vacation work sort of thing. I brought a bunch of my gear. We got an Airbnb up in Silver Lake. We were only going to stay for 2 months, but then we were loving it so much we stayed for 3. And it was kind of a, should we do this? Could we do this? Should we do this? And so I went there and I met with a lot of people and made a ton of friends there. And then we came back and then we had 2 kids, and it is something that has never left my blood. Like I have not been able to shake this feeling like we have to go to Los Angeles. We have to go to Los Angeles. And I went, and then COVID hit. So everything just got like the momentum just got messed up. Yeah. And then having kids, it just got really, complicated, and, we're not totally loving the political climate that's going on. And it just got weird. Yeah. But I was down there about a month ago, and I came back and I said to my wife again, like, we gotta go, man. Like, I gotta do this.
Yeah, especially in like March, right? Yeah. You're going to LA in March and then you go back to Toronto. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's just, if we don't do it, it's just going to bug me for the rest of my life. And it's really tough because I have a really great career in Toronto. Like I really can't complain about how things are going here. And there is a fear that you go to Los Angeles and then you just get lost in the shuffle. And my understanding is that, doesn't really matter what kind of credentials you have in Canada. You can't necessarily just roll into LA and be like, all right, I'm here. Let's do it. Give me a movie. It's like there's a hierarchy. A friend of mine described it as a city of mob bosses. You've got all your different composers that own certain pieces of the pie. And and you either have to carve out your piece of the pie, which is really hard, or you have to kind of come up through one of these mob families.
Yeah.
And, I just, part of me feels like I might be too old for that. I don't know if I want to like grind it out being someone's assistant. Like, nothing is below me, but I just don't think that's how I want to spend my days.
Right.
So I don't really know. We've been trying to figure out a way to make it work. I love Los Angeles so much. Yeah. It hurts me to talk about it, to be honest.
I love that place too. Whenever people complain about it, I'm like, I just always have so much fun there. And I think part of it is who you do know, right? Who you're going to visit or whatever, or the vibe you have when you're there. But I love it there. Yeah.
Oh man, it's amazing. We had a rule when we went there. It was we said yes to everything, no matter what. And we ended up in some crazy situations, like, and they were all great. We ended up in San Diego watching someone's movie premiere that we had met for 10 minutes at a rooftop party at a hotel in downtown LA that was like right out of Entourage. It was just like people in swimsuits. It was just very weird. Like just like tiny bikinis and shredded guys everywhere. We ended up at a party at Tom Green's house. We ended up a party up in like the Hollywood Hills. Ended up at the Magic Castle. Like it was just constant. Like and we felt there was this feeling where every day we would get in the car. I would work all morning because that was actually where I worked on. One of the video games I was working on was Russian Subway Dogs, and I did that in LA. Okay. And I would work until about 1:00. And then we would get in the car and we'd be like, what direction do you want to drive? And we would just go and crazy things would happen every day. It was amazing.
Yeah. It's that kind of place for sure. But with the smaller snippets of music, I'm curious if you ever, And I heard you talk about this too, which I thought was interesting. What are you going to spend your time on? Like, don't spend a bunch of time on a cue that's going to get buried in Foley and other things. But I'm curious, like, as you're writing these shorter snippets, did you ever have this urge to flesh any of them out or anything, after you wrote it? You're like, God, that'd be a great tune,
Yes, actually. It was really funny too, because sometimes people would reach out and be like, hey, what was that song in this episode? And be like, oh, it's not a song. It's an 8-second cue that Maylee and I wrote, and it sounds like a song. I actually did for fun once. This was years ago. I think it was around season 5. I went in and kind of took the greatest hits, like my favorite cues, and did like this 3-minute long kind of like medley, like DJ mix of them all.
Nice.
So that it's actually like a 3-minute long, greatest hits of Workin' Moms, and that was around episode 5. And yeah, there are cues, season 5.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes it does sort of bother me that these will only exist in these little bits of these little moments, especially some of the credits. There were a few cues that we did over the credits that we were really proud of. And then occasionally there's another thing that would happen, which is sort of funny. They would temp it with my old music. So when we would watch it through to spot it, it would be all old Workin' Moms cues, most of which they all really liked. And so the game was often like, I would just replace them. But then sometimes they would fall in love with the ones that were in there, which would happen fairly often. So it was like, can I do better can I beat my own cue,
Right, right.
But sometimes I would write these cues that I would really love, and they would be like, you know what, we're going to go with what we temped it with from this other episode you did. And be like, all right, cool. But I would always know that episode would kind of go in the pool, and then next season it would probably show up in the temp, and and there were sometimes I would even send notes. I would send notes to the editors and be like, this is a really good cue. We didn't use it. Can you highlight it and just make sure we use it? Because I'm really proud of it and I'd really love to see it. So there were a few cues that, things like that would happen with. But, I never got bummed out when cues got thrown out because, at the end of the day, they might live on to exist in another episode. So it was always kind of okay. And Catherine and Lisa and Phil, and everyone on the post team were always they were all so kind and respectful. They would never make you feel bad if they threw out a cue. They'd usually
nice.
It was almost overkill how you'd be like, Peter, we really love you. I'm really sorry. I think we want to go with the temp. And I'm like, it's fine. The temp is also me. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, right.
They were always, they're always really kind. So it was such a fun show to work on. I'm really sad it's over.
Yeah. I was not aware that season 7 was the final season. I thought there was just to be continued more, but this is the final season.
It is. And you know what? It's something, it's a bummer because, like I said, it was such a fun show to work on. And especially, man, by the end, everybody on that post team, the mixers, the music supervisors, the editors, Lisa, the associate producer, Catherine Reitman, John, the whole crew I loved hanging out with them. They were all so awesome. But at the same time, I totally respect Catherine pulling the plug on it because she wanted it to go out on a high note, and I felt like the show was as good as it had ever been. And there's I hate those shows that just go past their,
of course,
like Walking Dead, that's the show that should have ended at season 4,
Yes.
And my wife and I still watched it all, but you know what I mean? But I respect, I think that that takes a certain, amount of courage to pull the plug on something that's totally successful. She probably could have written this for another 5 seasons if she wanted to, but she's an incredibly talented, ambitious person. And, I'm sure she has tons of ideas of other fantastic shows she wants to work on. Right. So it was sad, but at the same time, I get it, and I'm stoked to see what she comes up with after this.
Yeah, for sure. But it also sounds like the core team kind of stayed the same through all 7 seasons, which I do not think was the case with The Walking Dead, right? Like, I mean,
right.
That's a
for
unique
the most
and
part,
special thing. Yeah.
We had a few different editors, and over the course of the 7 seasons, the editors changed over a little bit. But even like every single editor on that show, was awesome. Like I loved them. And it was really funny because as a composer, sometimes you get really used to the rhythm of an editor. And then there were some seasons where I could tell who edited what because my music would fit differently a little bit as I was writing it, and then the pace of scenes would always be a little bit different. But I mean, one of the things I feel lucky about is that I got to meet a handful of amazing editors that I'm really hope I get to work with again.
For sure. Peter, I'm curious about the pace because, I think people who listen to this show and who are interested in how music is made in various media are aware that the pace is different for TV, games, film.
Right.
What was the pace like for Workin' Moms? And, how much time did you have to work on a season? And what kinds of things were you getting weekly? I mean, how did that work?
The pace was about every week. It was usually pretty quick. So the turnover was fairly fast. However, so I remember like season 1 and 2 and 3 were, because there were growing pains and we were all still kind of like figuring it out. Yeah. I mean, mostly just season 1, 2, I should say, is what, those seasons were definitely difficult because we were still figuring out the sound of the show and we're still figuring out the pace of the schedules. But by the end, like by season 7, by the end of this season, we didn't even spot the episodes anymore. We just all trusted each other and we knew how to do it. And so they would just send me the edit with the temp in it. I've been working with this fantastic assistant named Gavin Bradley since season 3. He would go through and like pre-spot it for me. So he would just make a spreadsheet of where all those cues are. Mm-hmm. So that when I got down to work, I had a spreadsheet and I knew exactly where the cues were, and basically where they put it in the edit, that's where they wanted the music. I would go through, bang out all the tracks, and then often some of the cues I would write them and then send them to Maylee Todd, who's lived in Los Angeles for the last few years. So I would send it to her. That would be around noon. She would wake up. It would be 9:00 in the morning. She would get my email, work on it, have it to me by like 3:00, and then I'd throw it back in my sessions. So I mean, that Workin' Moms, it became a really well-oiled machine, especially by season 7. And then they wouldn't even review the music. We would literally then go into the mix, which there were a couple seasons when this was a very terrifying thing because they were also really busy. So we didn't always have time to review the music. I mean, when you're writing, directing, show running, like that's a lot. So we would go into the mix and then I would also deliver all of the temp stuff as proper stems, or Gavin would do it for me, my assistant. And then I would also deliver all the new music. So then we would watch the show down. And then if there were any cues that Catherine or Lisa weren't sure about, we would go back and then we would check out the temp one. And then it'd be like, I like the new one. I like the temp one. Can we do this little edit? Blah, blah, blah. So it became a really well-oiled machine, which was good because, again, there were times when I was working on more than one show at a time. So it was really helpful to have a show. I don't think I could have done 2 shows during season 1 of Workin' Moms, but by season 7, I could balance Workin' Moms and another show at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And with Maylee, you mentioned how you mapped her to the keyboard and you made all these samples, but I assume you were just continuously updating that sample bank and having her contribute new material through the end of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So every season we would get together and we would just brainstorm. We would just set up a microphone and be like, okay, I wrote down like just a bunch of things, like yell a bunch of versions of this and that and this, and do these sort of hays and these yeahs. And one of the most fun things we made was sort of a Maylee Todd. I called it the Maylee Todd Mellotron, and it was basically I got her to sing every single note for about 2 octaves, doing different vowels. So I could actually play her just like you'd hear. It sounded a lot like a mellotron, but it was Maylee, and so I could play that. And sometimes we would use that, or sometimes I would just use that as a demo, and then I'd send it to Maylee and be like, "Hey, can you flesh this out and replace it?" But it gave it like a really cool Like I would often play it the way you would hear a mellotron, like that sort of. You know, they used to have to anticipate that like 3-second rewind kind of thing, and so I would sort of play it in that sort of very Beatlesy style, which was kind of cool. Nice. So yeah, we were always updating it and coming up with new ways to keep it fresh.
So one of the first things I heard from you, well, in hindsight, probably the first thing I heard from you was Guacamelee when I played that years and years ago. But
nice.
But this time around, when I like dug into you, the first place I went was Spotify because I, wasn't able at that moment to dive into Netflix or whatever. And so I listened to Tales from Space, Mutant Blobs Attack.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really fun score. And I just, and I know it's like ancient now, 2012 or something like that, but it's fun that it's out there on Spotify, and I just wanted to acknowledge that I really enjoyed listening to that.
Thank you. That score was, I think it was the second video game I ever did.
Okay.
And yeah, that score was so fun. It was one of those things where when they showed me the video game, it just clicked. I'm like, I know exactly what we're doing for this. And it was a mixture of, like, this is a weird thing, but like when I was a kid, I was listening to a lot of punk and garage rock and surf rock, but for some reason the surf rock thing sort of opened this gateway into this sort of exotica pre-psychedelic 50s and 60s, like Martin Denny and Esquivel and Xavier Cugat and a bunch of, Henry Mancini. Like, I don't really know why that was a bridgeable genre, but as a kid, as a teenager, I listened to tons of that stuff, and I loved Esquivel so much. I was constantly buying his records at Valley Village anytime I'd see them, and then I started buying the weirder ones on eBay. So when they came to me with that, they're like, I was like, this is the style we're going for. And then I also mixed it with that sort of late 60s sort of switched on synthesizer record kind of idea. So the idea was you would have this, these weird, exotic, very like Latin influenced scores, but then you'd have this like really corny analog synth going like ding, 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 along with it, which I like to sort of think about that moment. They were like, Esquivel, check it out, we just got like this weird new thing, it's called a synthesizer. And he's like, I want to put that on, and so then someone goes in and they somehow figure out a way to jam, which so much music from the late 60s has that, like, what is this weird synth doing in this song,
Yeah.
So that was a really fun project, which ultimately led to working on Guacamelee with the same company.
Yeah, and what a fun couple of games, because you worked on both of those. Yeah. Talk to me about that, because when you were talking earlier about, what business do I have doing these scores, were you maybe thinking about that? Because it is weird to hire a Canadian dude to do mariachi, but from what I understand, you had some authenticity helpers there too, right? Like, so that was one of those gigs where they asked me I remember the meeting so well. I went in and they asked me, like, they showed me the game. They're like, hey, yes, we want to do this like mariachi thing, can you do it? And I was like, oh yeah, I can definitely do it. But there was one of those, like, part of it was drawing from my
commercial experience. It was like in my head, I'm going, I don't know how to do this, but I know that I can go figure it out really quick.
Exactly. Yep.
Like I have enough faith in training in how to do that I know that I can figure it out. So in a way, I don't want to say I bluffed my way through the meeting, but I came out the other side and I had the gig, and then I went home, and I found online the drummer for my old band had a guitarron and a vihuela, so I drove out. He loaned me those. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and learned how to play them. And then I listened to tons and tons of mariachi music and Mexican folk music, did a bunch of research on it, learned like there are all these very like strict rules about mariachi in terms of the instrumentation and what you can and can't have, if you have a 6-string classical guitar, that's not mariachi. It has to be a vihuela, actually, I don't actually know if that's true, but I do know for sure that you cannot, it's sacrilege to replace a guitarron with any other bass instrument. Like, do not replace that with an upright. Do not replace that with and there are like very strict rules about what is considered authentic mariachi and what is just sort of Mexican folk music. Yeah. And then so I started writing this stuff, and then they had a gentleman there, oh man, whose name I forget. He was such a great dude. He was really I'm going to kick myself for not being able to shout him out because he was such a nice dude. But he was from Mexico, and so all of our cues had to go through him. Because he was there to make sure this was authentic, and there was no appropriation. Like it all had to go through him, and he had to make sure like this is correct. And there were times where he would send stuff back and be like, you got this wrong. This isn't actually how the rhythm goes. It has to be like this. So that was really awesome. And it was also, that I don't love working on projects where you're incorporating music from other cultures for that reason. So to have someone who is vetting it and making sure that you weren't doing anything awful was like encouraging, Yeah. So yeah, it was a really, really fun project to work on. And I should shout out, so Rom DePrisco, so it was myself and Rom DePrisco did the vast majority of the score together for the first one. And then in the second one, they brought on some guys, I think they were from San Diego, called the Mariachi Entertainment System, MES, which was obviously a play on NES. And their whole thing, I believe, was they would learn covers of classic video game songs but play them like mariachi style.
I love that. That's great.
And I actually got to work with them on the second one, because they ended up covering one of my themes from the first one. So we worked together on that.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And then I also hired them for some live instrumentation of some of my cues. So I would send it to them, and they sent it back. And they were also incredibly lovely people, like really, really kind and fun to work with.
Yeah. Peter, what's your main instrument? How did you start off your musical life?
That's also kind of a complicated question. Piano. So I started piano when I was a kid. I did the sort of the classic practice every day. I had an amazing piano teacher named Anna Leia, who was I'm not going to get into it. She was a conflicted individual, but she was an amazing piano teacher. So I studied with her until I was about 12, and then Nirvana performed on SNL, and that was, I was saying to someone, like, that was my Beatles Ed Sullivan moment. Like, when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm never playing piano again. Give me a guitar. I'm dumping bleach all over my pants. I'm dyeing my hair. Like, it was just like my life was completely different after that.
You must have been in middle school? Were you in middle school? You said 12. That is when
I was grade 7.
Okay.
I specifically remember it was grade 7 because I walked into school that Monday with like freshly destroyed jeans that I had destroyed myself, and
so you were literal. You literally.
Oh yeah, I was like, when I saw that, I mean, I'd already known, I knew Nirvana, but that was the first time I'd seen them, and I was like, oh my god, like it was just such a big like moment.
Yeah.
So then I got really into playing guitar, and then I got really into playing surf rock. I played in a surf rock band all through high school. It was a surf rock trio, very authentic. Well, I wouldn't say it was authentic, but it was very 60s influenced instrumental surf rock, mostly just influenced by Manor, Astroman, actually. But that, I would say, like I said, like that surf rock thing taught me a lot because it was all about melody. You had to sustain a whole song by writing catchy melodies. And so I learned a lot. And for some reason, like I was saying, that spread into this weird world of listening to like Henry Mancini, because like Peter Gunn kind of had like a surf rock thing, and that was like that was a surf rock standard. So you learned it. But then I started listening. I listened to the whole soundtrack, which is now embedded in my brain, and the Pink Panther soundtrack. I mean, not all of his soundtracks were my bag, but those two were amazing. Right. And then those led to like the James Bond soundtracks, and like I was saying,
John Barry and
and all that stuff. So in a weird way, I feel like that kind of subconsciously influenced me for years. I just didn't realize that it was going to come into play until I was much older.
Sure.
But then the big moment was when I was about 17. I got a 4-track, and my friend, who's a Canadian rapper who goes by Jesse Dangerously, gave me a program called Impulse Tracker, which is like this DOS-based sequencing sampling program you could run on a Windows 3.1 computer. It was a bunch of numbers scrolling by. Right? It was like it looked like the Matrix. Like when you, it's literally, that's what it looked like when you're using it. And I remember once I started playing with that, it was like that was my first taste of producing. You could record a drum loop and you could loop it, and then you could sample. I would sample like Dennis Leary and the Beatles and the Specials and Elvis Costello, and I'd make these crazy hip hop tracks out of them. And between that and my 4-track, that was when I like deeply, deeply, deeply fell in love with the world of production and recording. And that's sort of, and now I kind of say that, my main instrument is my studio.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a lot of instruments around me, but really it's, I think my studio chops that allows me to make them all sound good. Because I'm not, there's a lot of instruments in here I can't play very well, but I've got some tricks up my sleeve to,
for sure,
trick a few people.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I got to mention Daft Science and coins for sure, because this is another big part of your life. And, I'm just a tiny bit older than you. So we had a lot of similar musical touchstones, I think, throughout life. And the Beastie Boys definitely being a huge part of my, early adulthood and whatnot. So, talk about Daft Science, which is very cool. Beastie Boys remixes, but only using Daft Punk samples. So, just talk about that if you would.
Yeah, so that was like, honestly, that whole thing was a giant mistake and a giant fluke. Like, it was the most uncontrived like thing I've ever done. Basically, it all started 2014. I actually was looking at my backpack recently. It's got the South by Southwest badge on it from 2014, and I was like, oh my god, it's almost been 10 years since I went to South by that one time.
Wow.
So it was 2014, and I was on my way to Austin to DJ for a bunch of my friends who I'm friends with a whole bunch of rappers in Toronto, and I'll often DJ for them. And so they were all there. I was on my own. I landed in Chicago. I had like a 3 or 4 hour layover, and I was just bored. So I just took out my laptop and just started like messing around in Logic. And I had these Beastie Boys acapellas, because at the time you could download them right off their website. They just put them up there and they're like, remix our stuff, we don't care. And so I had them on my laptop, but I didn't have any of my sample drives with all of my like drums and kicks and snares and stuff. So I was kind of limited in what I could do. So I just on a whim grabbed a Daft Punk track and I just threw it into Logic and I just started chopping it up and just started making this little beat out of it. And I think I just kind of played with it for a while, and then my plane came. I landed in Austin, and I remember getting in the car and I was like, guys, I gotta play this thing I made in Chicago. And I plug it into the aux of the car, and everyone in the car is like, what the hell, dude? Like, you need to finish this. This is hilarious. So I was like, all right, cool. You know, like at that point, like Girl Talk was like, had already like completely blown up. So it was like the world of like quote mashups unquote it wasn't anything new.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like I was mashing it up. I felt like I was like remixing, like I was producing new tracks using tiny snippets of these songs. So I finished the track. I got back to Toronto. I finished the track. And I had two friends who worked for a graphic design company who I really admired, and I played it for them, and they were like, you need to make an album. If you make an album, we will make the cover art for free. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to turn that down. Let's do it. So,
right.
So I spent, because I was, at that time, I think I just finished Bomb Girls. I don't think I had anything lined up. So I had like a few months where I was unemployed. So I just worked on this. It took about 3 months to make it. Because I did work on it quite a bit. And then at the end, we finished it. We put it up on Reddit and Bandcamp and sent it out to a bunch of blogs. And then like nothing happened and nobody cared. And it was the most anti-climatic thing I'd ever done. I was just like, well, that was fun. But like my friends all had it and they all loved it. But it was, it was a puff of smoke. And then it was like 5 years later or 4 years later, I was lying in bed and suddenly my phone starts blowing up and someone had posted it on Reddit, and then it got picked up by Dancing Astronaut. And at that point, Dancing Astronaut was a pretty influential blog. And then all these other people start picking it up. And then it was like within a week, it was full on viral. It was trending on Twitter. It was trending on Facebook. My Bandcamp free downloads were getting maxed out every hour. I had to like keep paying, because with Bandcamp you get a certain amount of free downloads, and then you have to pay to enable more. And so I had to keep paying money to like keep it free. But I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Like, I don't want people to not download it, but and it just went completely bonkers. And it got picked up by like Maxim and People magazine. It got covered in Billboard. Like, it was the craziest.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and I was terrified. I thought I was going to be sued. I was waiting for the lawyers to call me and just be like, you're going down. I was so scared. And then my manager had some kind of back and forth with them where it sounded like the language they used was not... They were not saying it was okay, but they weren't saying it wasn't, they didn't say this, it's fine. They were just kind of like, then the message we got was maybe don't make it downloadable. And so that's why it's not downloadable anymore. Okay. I mean, if anyone just emails me, I'll send it to you. I don't care. But I get about 3 emails a week asking people for a link, and I just give it to them. But, but yeah. And so it was a crazy thing. It was, it's something I'm proud of. And it has become a weirdly defining thing in my career, even though it's not. I've never tried to replicate it. It doesn't feel like something I could ever replicate. It doesn't seem like the first one was such a naive project of just like, curing some boredom. To do it again, I just feel like you can't. It was just luck. You can't tempt that kind of luck. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it has opened a lot of doors, since then. It opened up a lot of opportunities and with different projects and different shows, and gotten my foot in the door because of the credibility that it has kind of offered me, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's also, you know, for a while it was weird. Like there were some strange people that would take my calls, which was a little bit strange. It was like, oh, people are actually willing to like hang it, like, because we went to Los Angeles right after that, and you know, I got in touch with some people I wouldn't have thought would let me hang out with them. And I don't know if that was because of Daft Science or if that's just because they were cool. They were just nice people. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
But yeah, that was Daft Science.
It's amazing. I love it. What are you working on these days that you can talk about?
Right now, yeah, what can I talk about? I am working on season. So it's sort of funny in the what I call the off season. So most of the dramas that I do, so like it's like Workin' Moms, The Lake, SkyMed, all those shows for whatever reason, I think they all shoot during the summer, so they all post in the winter. So you know, September rolls around, and that's when I'm usually busy with those projects. And then in the summertime, for whatever reason, I have a couple of studios that I'll do kind of lifestyle music for. So right now I'm working on some what I call Reno rock for an upcoming Reno show, which is I equate it to scooping ice cream in the summertime. It's just like this easy. It's like, it's not easy, but it's like a nice low stress. I come in and I just like make fun music all day and then send it to them.
Yeah.
And then I do have, SkyMed is coming up now. They're shooting SkyMed, and we're going to be doing season 2 of that soon.
Okay.
And yeah, those are the two main things. I'm also working on this 90s pop record that I'm really excited about. It's so when I was working on The Lake, a lot of those cues were there were a bunch of them that were steeped in 90s nostalgia, very Max Martin, Britney Spears style production and songwriting. Okay. A lot of the cues in that were very pop, like they sounded like snippets of pop songs. And I worked with this great singer songwriter on a handful of them named Alex. I hope I get her last name. I always get it wrong. Alex Petkovsky. It's a bit of a mouthful. And she's an incredible songwriter and really, just super talented. And so we worked on these songs that sound like full-on Britney tracks. And when I was finished The Lake, I talked to her, I'm like, should we just make a record? Because I think we would be really good at this. So we're making an album.
Nice.
We got 3 kind of going right now of just really authentic sounding 90s pop.
I love that.
I ended up acquiring a bunch of the equipment that they used to make those. So it's got a really authentic vibe to the production. And part of it too is I realized like there was never if you want to license a 90s song in a TV show, you're probably going to pay a lot of money for it because all the 90s songs are these big hits, right? There was never like an indie bedroom producer movement of people flooding the market with like indie 90s pop songs. Like that never happened. So there just aren't a lot of them, right? So we kind of had this idea, like we could probably license these to TV shows and probably like get them out there that way, because I don't think there are a lot of options if you want to license an authentic sounding 90s jam,
Yeah.
So that's the other thing I'm working on right now, which is
fun.
Really fun. It is so fun. It's like one of the most fun things I've ever done. It's just, it's so over the top. It's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, 90s pop is pop, right? I mean, it's just bubbly, and I mean, because the 80s didn't sound, obviously, nothing like that, and the 2000s weren't. I mean, it's just so pop, right? I mean, I don't know.
It is. You know what's funny? It is, and I hate to say this because I don't want to be like a gear nerd, but a lot of it was dictated by the equipment they were using, and that is, if you look at the 80s, all these new synthesizers are coming out. So they're all using, you know, the big analog, the Moogs, the Rolands, the Jupiters, and then you've got the DX7s coming out, and you know, the Synclavs, and just like, it's so you hear, like when I hear those sounds, I'm really good at reproducing those because I know exactly the stuff they're using. Yeah. But when the 90s rolled around, the reason those songs all sound that way is they're all using the same 10 pieces of gear. And those pieces of gear have pre-programmed like drums, like kicks and snares and samples in them, you know. So
you're talking about hardware.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So like things like the Roland JV1080, the EMU Planet Fat, the EMU Orbit. I've got a bunch of them here, the old like Korgs and the M1, like they all have these presets in them and everyone was just using them over and over and over again, which is why like they all use the same snare sound and the same clap, and all of them, they all use these stupid scratches. Like, so in order to do it, you actually need to have these pieces of equipment to actually make it sound that way. And that's the thing that really defined, you know, if you listen to a Backstreet Boys track versus an NSYNC track versus a Britney track, like they all have this same sound because they're all using the same, you know, basically the same sample libraries essentially is what they're doing.
Right.
So I don't know, and I'm fascinated by that.
Yep. Well, Peter, I mean, I could keep going, but we'll just have to do this again sometime. Totally.
Anytime, man. This was fantastic.
Yeah, this has been great. And I look forward to whatever's next and whatever's still happening and all the things. So thank you so much for all of your time today. Is there
awesome. Thank you for having me.
Is there anything else you want to add before, you know? I don't mean to just abruptly pull the curtain.
Yeah. No, I think we covered all the exciting stuff.
Okay.
I'm glad that I got to shout out my pop record.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to hear it. Like,
it's very funny.
Do you have a time you're aiming for to be done with it?
No, the problem is that both myself and Alex are both really busy. She's doing really well. She does a lot of music placements and like Selling Sunset and all those like awesome kind of like cool LA based reality shows. And she's very busy. So it's sort of something that we're both doing on our free time.
Sure.
So I don't know. I was hoping we could get it out in a few months, but it probably won't come out for like a year.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll keep my eyes and ears out.
Totally.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Awesome. Thank you so much.